Start up, okay, guys? Back from the top. Ready?
Okay, yep. Welcome. Hi, I'm Brian Bleesner from Wisconsin DOT. Sorry for our IT problems, but I think we're back up and running. You've joined us for the I-94 East-West Public Involvement Meeting, March 16th, 2021. Obviously, we're doing this virtually, and this is with abundance caution to our stakeholders to make sure they stay safe. And we want to make sure that eventually we can do this in person. So thank you for participating tonight. Our Spanish-speaking participants are welcome to follow along on the Spanish page of our project website, and then come back to this site to ask questions in the chat. Questions may also be emailed or mailed to the address on the website. Throughout the presentation, we'll be addressing questions we received in previous meetings with our stakeholders. After the presentation, we will address questions we receive in the chat and questions we received emailed to us this evening or sent via the comment form on the project website. We will be answering questions orally, and so don't expect a written response in the chat. Again, questions and comments, you can submit questions throughout the presentation through the YouTube comment section. An interactive comment form is also available on our project website, and we will be monitoring throughout the meeting at the address on the screen. You can submit comments via email to Josh Levesque at the address on the screen. And lastly, you can mail comments directly to us at WSDOT Southeast Region in Waukesha at the address on the screen. So first, some project background. I-94 is the gateway to Milwaukee. Governor Evers' administration has committed to Milwaukee and Southeast Region, part of the state. We think this project will improve access for people getting to and from within the city. Safer access for city residents and visitors. It will bring reliable infrastructure, which is critical for businesses to operate. And lastly, we wanted to work hand in hand with strong local street network and a strong transit network. The project corridor is shown on the screen in red. It starts on near 70th Street on the west end of I-94 to 16th Street on the east end, up and down 175, a little bit north of the stadium and a little bit south of the stadium along Frederick Miller Way. The project itself is entirely in the city of Milwaukee, but it's very close proximity to Wauwatosa, West Dallas, and West Milwaukee. The project needs that need to be addressed. First and foremost, we have deteriorated pavement and bridges. This is 1960s era infrastructure that's nearing the end of its useful life. We have a significant safety problem with an average crash rate 2 to 3 times higher than the statewide average. We have a freeway that needs to work hand in hand with a crowded local street network. We want to leverage the investments that have been previously made in the zoo and Marquette interchanges and those modernization projects. And we also want to make sure that we're addressing the congestion. This slide shows a little bit about the improvements that can be realized through modernization. The safety and traffic flow of the Marquette interchange, the zoo interchange, and I-94 north-south in Racine and Kenosha counties have improved substantially with the modernizations that have recently happened in the last decade. In the Marquette interchange, we have 48% fewer crashes since 2008. Since 2018, in the zoo interchange, we have 29% fewer crashes. And since 2020, the reopening of I-94 north-south, there's been a 34% reduction. So in addition to safety, lower crash rates mean fewer costs to motorists and improved traffic flow. This is a project of local importance. I think many times people think this I-94 takes people from the suburbs to downtown and the reverse commute in the afternoon. But our data has really shown to dispute that. During the rush hour, 76% of all trips start or end in the corridor. So for instance, if you live near UWM and work at the stadium, you're probably using this section of Freeway to get to your job. Conversely, if you live in Story Hill and maybe work at UWM, again, you're probably using the freeway. The remaining 24% of trips are trips that begin or end outside the corridor. So those are trips that, for instance, if you live in Bayview and work at Freighter, you're using the freeway, and that's what we consider an external trip. Improvements to safety and reductions in congestion along I-94 will make it more convenient and safer for people to access the area, make it easier for local residents to use I-94 to access opportunities both within and outside the corridor. And this data was based on 2012 traffic analysis for the origin destination information. It's a project that has regional and statewide importance. Obviously, it's I-94 because it's interstate, but it also has an importance locally. If you stand in the middle of Stadium Interchange and draw a 5-mile radius around yourself, you're encompassing 26% of the people, 32% of the jobs, and 41% of the businesses within the 7-county region. So this is a highway and access portal to many of the economic centers of the region. In terms of freight on I-94, there's certainly a very large importance. There's 17 million tons of freight valued at $25 billion that travel through this corridor. It uses the corridor to access 57 other states or provinces. And on the screen is a lot of specific data about specific economic value of the freight that travels in the corridor. Our truck percentage on the route on I-94 is between 5 and 10% during the peak hour. Our conclusion from this data is I-94 is extremely important to commerce in our state. Now a little information about the environmental impact statement. An environmental impact statement was prepared for this route, for this corridor. It was completed in January of 2016 with a final EIS. In September of 2016, Federal Highway Administration approved that work with the approval of the record of decision. Roughly a year later, the East-West, because the East-West was not funded, the record of decision was rescinded. And then July of this year, 2020, we started the reevaluation process of that previous EIS. We should note that reevaluation of an environmental impact statement is a very common process. Given the size of this project and size of similar projects, it's almost always done. I-94 East-West study. Our goal is to establish a record of decision, which is again the federal highway approval of our environmental impact statement. As we started the study, we wanted to make 2 strong commitments and reiterate that we're not pursuing the double-deck option at the cemetery, and we're not moving any graves in that same cemetery section. We did also want to look at transit in a new way. We're investigating additional transit opportunities, and we've formed a Transit Technical Advisory Committee. We're also wanting to make sure that we're looking at DBE, and we're investigating disadvantaged business and workforce development opportunities as part of this project. So the reevaluation of an environmental impact statement, what does that really mean? There's really 3 primary criteria and 3 questions that we have to answer as part of our work. First, have the rules changed? So have the regulations, the federal guidelines for these documents changed? Secondly, has the environment changed? For example, has the traffic changed substantially or other conditions or land uses around the project? And then lastly, third, has the alternative itself changed? So is the footprint that we're proposing or the proposed impacts, have those changed substantially? So we're right in the middle of this very serious look at this data and the approach that we've taken. So now we've got a graphic of the preferred alternative. I know this is at a very high level, but it is a bit of an overview, and we'll get into more specifics later in the presentation. The yellow highlights the new pavement that is proposed as part of the project, and the orange is the bridges that are part of our proposal. So at a high level, we're adding a 4th lane in each direction. In the cemetery area east of Holly Road, which is the most sensitive, there is a pinch point where we have to construct a narrow segment with 11-foot lanes and 2-foot shoulders for a very short 30-foot distance. We're reconstructing the 68th and 70th Street interchanges on the very west end. That configuration is very similar to what it is today. At Holly Road, we're maintaining to and from the west only, the ramps on the east side, because of that cemetery area, there's no width to provide those ramps on the east side. At the stadium interchange, we're moving all the ramp and interchange movements to the right hand to improve safety and extending local roads under the interchange to accommodate brewer traffic and other local traffic. And then on the very east end at 35th and 27th Street, we're rebuilding those interchanges to a very similar configuration. So now a little bit more detail about the preferred alternative. Again, at the cemetery area east of Holly Road is our most sensitive. So what we have on this graphic in green is the new proposed lanes with the full 12-foot wide shoulder, 12-foot wide lanes and nominal shoulders. And then in yellow is the area where we're transitioning down to the 11-foot lanes. And then in the orange color is the 30-foot distance where we actually have the 11-foot lanes. So again, those orange little areas, both eastbound and westbound, are about 30 foot in distance. So now the stadium interchange, we're going to walk through some of the most important movements in the stadium. Again, the yellow is the new pavement, orange is the new bridges. In dark blue, we're showing the movements for eastbound traffic to get to 175. Again, they're on the rightmost side of the lane configuration. So to go north, you're at the top level and you're taking a ramp over most of the other work to get north. To travel south, you're in the same very similar configuration that you are today, taking a ramp to head south down 175. The flip movement heading westbound, coming in from the east to head north, you take a ramp that again is pretty similar to where it is today. And to head south, you're up at the upper level of the interchange, flying over the rest of the ramp work. On 175 itself, to head east from the north, you're going to go through a new signalized intersection, which again reduces the impact of the interchange and allows us to accommodate a smaller footprint. From the south, you're heading north and taking a ramp to head east, similar to today's configuration. The flip side, to head west from 175, from the north, you're taking a ramp similar to the way you do today. From the south, you're again going through a signalized intersection to merge onto the freeway. A little bit farther east at 35th and 26th Street, again, the conventions are yellow is pavement, oranges are new bridges. We're replacing essentially in a very similar way what you see out there today, except now we have 4 lanes and we're able to provide some longer taper distances on the ramps by bridging on the north side of the freeway, bridging the on and off ramps between 28th and 35th Street. And this is pulling back, looking a little bit farther east at the 27th Street area. Again, the basic configuration is very similar to today, but we are lengthening ramps and adjusting alignments to accommodate modernization standards. We do have some pretty significant impacts with several relocations needed at this area. St. Paul itself is shifted a bit to the south to improve the distance between this 25th and St. Paul intersection and the freeway. And then this slide shows our some of the additional off-system improvements that we are proposing to mitigate some of the changes at Holly Road. The biggest one of these is near the top towards the right, the Washington Street extension, which is a significant new connection between Holly Road and 68th Street. And then we're also proposing some additional improvements along National and Greenfield. So the basic traffic data, what's new? Obviously, the pandemic itself has greatly changed the traffic volumes. So a little bit of summary of what we've seen in the last year. Our peak traffic from 20 and 21 in the weeks following the Safer at Home order, which was almost exactly a year ago, our AM and PM peak, so really the commuter hours in the AM and the PM, those volumes dropped by about 45%. The overall total daily volume dropped by about 50%. What happened after that was that we started seeing a return of traffic. So from about May through September, there was a relatively consistent growth of and traffic return to the system. That was pretty consistent through the fall, but has started fluctuating, and there are some drops here in the current winter season. So how do we judge the effects of the pandemic, and how do we put that in the context of the pre-pandemic volumes and maybe what's going to happen in the future? What we know from a traffic counting perspective is pre-pandemic in 2019, there was significant congestion on I-94. So what we did is a sensitivity analysis on those volumes, and we took those volumes and said, okay, what happens if we reduce those volumes by 5%, 10%, 15%? We got all the way to 25% before we saw the need for the fourth lane be eliminated. So that acceptable level of service that we want to get with the fourth lane is still needed unless we see more than 25% reduction in traffic. It's important to note that that 25% reduction in traffic we would have to be assured that that was going to be sustained through the life of the project, and our design life is through 2050. So we do know that our traffic numbers are rebounding from the earlier days of Safer at Home, and our evaluation of the traffic and the effects of the pandemic continue. Right now, indications are that capacity expansion continues to be justified. So equity in transportation. What we've learned from the past, and when I talk about past, we're really talking about when the freeways were originally built, is that we had to improve how we did environmental studies and make decisions, and that those types of improvements were really made through new laws that were passed in the 1970s. So we have improved environmental studies and an improved process that brings the community to the table. From a programmatic standpoint, WSDOT has looked for new ways to garner stakeholder input. We've got our continuous automated vehicle committee and our non-driver advisory group. Also, from a community and neighborhood benefits of transportation projects, we're looking for these projects to bring opportunities in the areas of jobs, working with DB businesses, and bringing better mobility options for all. And one thing I just want to point on the graphic, and one thing that we've learned at the DOT throughout this process is that equality does not equal equity, and it's an important distinction that we're trying to make in our work. From an outreach perspective, we have done a significant amount of outreach. First, I want to highlight a few things that were done when the original EIS was completed. Through that process, which was a multi-year process from roughly 2013 through 2016, we held more than 300 stakeholder meetings. We had 5 major public information meetings, 2 public hearings, as well as outreach at State Fair, where we talked to thousands of visitors. Since our restart in 2020, we've had nearly 100 external stakeholder meetings. We've had online, almost all of those have been online, and using conversations to share information and gather input. Those stakeholder meetings have been wide-ranging. We've had just a few people or one-on-one meetings, but we've also held neighborhood meetings where we've had groups of 70 attend. So a little bit of information about budget, jurisdiction, and funding. Our estimate of the cost of what we're proposing, we do have an EIS that has a published cost in it, and that cost we know is higher today than what was in that original EIS. Given the effects of inflation due to the project delay, we expect that the total cost of this project will be over $1 billion. We are working on an updated estimate, and that is being prepared as part of the reevaluation process. The note, I guess, just to make sure everybody understands, the 2014 estimate that was in the EIS was $852 million. So yes, transportation funding is stretched. However, Southeast freeways are critical to the state and the region economy, and I-94 east-west is the next highest priority corridor for the department. WSDOT is involved in many transportation-related functions: airports, harbors, rails, transit, our Department of Motor Vehicles, local roads, state patrol, bike and ped facilities, freeway and state trunk highway projects. Department wants to make it clear that funding, a reduction in spending on I-94 does not unfortunately translate into an increase in any other of these categories. So it's not the department's decision to put certain amounts of money in transit or local roads or freeways. Those are different pots of money, and those are funded separately. In terms of our schedule, our anticipated schedule is to go through the reevaluation and eventually get to a record of decision. We're hopeful that that can happen by late this calendar year in 2021. If that environmental process and that reevaluation would dictate the need for a supplemental EIS, which is part of that process, that would take longer, obviously, and could go well into 2022 for completion of a record of decision under a supplemental EIS scenario. The enumeration and funding for the project is in the current budget that's being deliberated right now, and so that could potentially happen in 2021. That would lead to some preliminary and eventually a final design engineering over the next few years. In terms of construction, best case scenario on getting through all those steps, getting enumeration, getting adequate funding, could start as early as 2023, probably more likely 24 as a best case scenario. And the construction itself would likely take 3 to 4 years, again, dependent upon the amount of funding. Now we'd like to talk a little bit about City of Milwaukee impacts from the project and opportunities from the project. In terms of opportunities, we're estimating that 6,000 to 10,000 people could be employed by the project, given the size of the proposal. It leads directly to potential for economic revitalization from renewed connectivity, neighborhood revitalization through the construction mitigation process. We've heard strongly that this project can help connect the valley, which is south of the freeway, to the near west side, which is north. And state and federal government investment in infrastructure is certainly an important aspect. In terms of disadvantaged business opportunities, our mega projects have a good track record of providing DBE business opportunities and providing significant amount of funding that gets carried out by DBE businesses. The list here is all the different types of businesses that have DBE businesses that we've used on mega projects to get those projects constructed. It's important to note that DBEs are almost always locally owned and operated. Not going to read down this list, but this is the list of all the firms on the Zoo interchange that were classified as DBE and received contracts as part of that project. In terms of relocations, the the project itself has done, I think, a really good job of getting a lot accomplished and maintaining a very compact footprint. But unfortunately, we still need to buy some private lands for part of the project. So this is a listing of the 6 residential relocations that we're anticipating and the 8 business relocations. And again, this is based on the information and the 2016 Final EIS, and which will, the reevaluation work that we're currently doing will confirm or alter this list. We've gotten a lot of feedback about understanding the effect on property values that the project may bring to people who live near the freeway. What I want to do is maybe read from you what is in our current EIS. So under the preferred alternative, the location of I-94 would be similar to where it is today, but to determine the net change up to property values due to the wider right-of-way would be difficult because of the project includes noise wells and changes in access that may also contribute to both increases or decreases in property values. While there has been some research on the topic, it is difficult to rely on the results of a study to draw meaningful conclusions given all the variables. As part of any large transportation project, WSDOT evaluates the impacts that may lead to diminishing property values and mitigates for specific impacts, such as noise and visual impacts, to minimize the impacts on property values. The mitigation measures are developed with community input and through the final design stage. So this is the names of the DOT folks that are working on the project, our contact information, phone numbers. If you have any further questions or follow-up, feel free to contact any of us. So with that, that concludes our presentation today. Now we're going to move into the question and answer portion. Again, we are monitoring the chat, the email address, and the forms that are being submitted. So Beth, are we ready?
We are.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you again to everyone who has sent in questions on the online comment form. We've received quite a few over the past few days, as well as throughout the meeting here. A lot of questions in the chat, and then a number of questions that were emailed to our project manager. We really do appreciate the amount of involvement and interest that people have in this project and their willingness to spend time with us. We may not be able to get through every comment tonight, just for time constraints. So if we don't get to your question tonight, please do send an email to Josh Levesque, our project manager. His contact information is on the website. And include your contact information so that we can get back to you with an answer when you send it in, if we don't get to everything tonight. So how we want to start out too, we have received quite a few online comment forms and emails that have a number of sort of common themes. So we wanted to address a few of those themes just kind of right up front. Brian's addressed a number of them in his presentation, but we wanted to make sure that people recognize that we are seeing their comments. The first one, Brian, is that people have said that it's really unacceptable to continue without updating the EIS. Can you address that, please?
So yeah, that's really the outcome of the reevaluation process. So as we reevaluate, and again, that's a pretty common process that we do on a lot of our mega-sized projects. Really the questions we're asking in that reevaluation process will give us the answer as to whether or not the existing EIS is still valid or if we need to supplement. So that's the question we're trying to answer. Supplementing the EIS is still a very viable option and something that will, is a very legitimate conclusion of that process. And so if the project has changed substantially in those 3 key areas that I described in the presentation, the conclusion of that would be is that we do need to supplement and add to the existing document. We do have a very robust document though, and we do want to make sure that we're getting the value out of what was previously done. It's a very substantial document with lots of documentation.
is if people have wondered if we could just repair the freeway and not widen it.
Yeah, I think the department feels like, given the level of deterioration on the facility and the safety problems that we're seeing, just repairing is really not prudent, and so really replacing what's out there is what is needed, and we feel that the appropriate solution is the modernization, because it does update the geometry and addresses the significant safety issue that we're seeing. Again, the corridor is seeing 2 to 3 times higher than the statewide average from an accident rate, and improving the safety is really paramount in one of the key things that we're trying to accomplish with the project.
You mentioned modernization, but a number of people have also asked if we could modernize the freeway, but don't expand it.
Sure.
The lanes.
So, yeah, I mean, expansion alone is not the reason why you modernize. So you could modernize and make a lot of the geometric improvements that we're proposing. It doesn't address the congestion that we're seeing out there and we've seen in the past. So part of the safety improvements that we would propose is the 4th lane, which just does have a safety value. The other thing to also keep in mind is that the modernization and the amount of lanes, frankly, that are out there today on the east and the west, and you have to figure out a way to safely transition if you don't have the 4th lane there. And I think as many people probably have driven the corridor realize the amount of lanes that are coming out of the zoo and the congestion that happens right today at 70th Street heading eastbound is a significant problem, and that doesn't go away unless you address the capacity part of that.
Thank you. We've had a number of questions about funding, and people have asked if the funding, instead of being spent on the freeways, could fund transit improvements or local road improvements.
Yeah, again, the idea that the department has the discretion to put money into transit or local roads or other sub-programs, it's just not, we don't have that discretion. So the project pot that we're pulling to eventually fund this would be the Southeast Mega Pot, which is for Southeast freeways. And so we don't have the discretion to be able to pull money out of that and put it over into transit and take care of some of the transit issues that we know are chronic, but unfortunately can't be addressed through this project directly.
Okay, thank you. We have had questions. A specific design question was asked if it'd be possible to add an additional exit for Miller Brewing to kind of help reduce some of the truck traffic that's going through the neighborhoods.
So I got Jeff Bauer here from our consultant team. I think Jeff could probably take a shot at that one.
Sure. One thing to describe is that with the reconfiguration of the stadium interchange, the ramps that currently exit and enter the freeway at Mitchell will be shifted to the east. There's not, again, the physical space at Mitchell in the future condition to allow those ramps to stay there. So the local road connections that Brian mentioned in his summary are the fact that we're going to have ramps that will exit the freeway and enter the freeway from westbound and come down to 44th Street, existing 44th Street that runs along the river, just to the west of the river. So a ramp will exit 94 heading east and exit down to 44th, and then the reverse is also going to be allowed from 44th. You can enter the freeway going west. So that would be a ramp that's that can provide great access to Miller Brewing. In addition, there's not, other than that, just given the geometry of the entire stadium interchange as well as the close proximity to 35th Street interchange, that's the only ramps that we're going to be able to accommodate, that would go to Miller.
Okay. Thank you. One of the questions that we received in the chat, if a sound barrier is approved on the bluff north of the stadium near Story Hill, would the wall be north of the existing paved walking path, north of the freeway, or south of the path?
Yeah, Jeff. Can you look at that one
also? If there is a noise wall that is ultimately constructed in relation to the Story Hill neighborhood, it will be up on top of the bluff to provide the noise abatement that would be needed. So it would be north of the path. The path is down near the freeway and closer to the elevation of the freeway. So if there is a wall, it would be up above that to the north.
Okay. Another question from the chat. Will the Holly Road exit and entrance ramps be removed as was proposed in the original plan? Well, I think you did address that, but if
Yeah.
maybe just to kind of make sure that's understood.
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, right now, the preferred alternative that was in the original plan has not changed. I mean, that's still an open question. It's still part of the reevaluation process. But right now that hasn't changed. So those ramp removals are still part of the plan.
Speaking of the term preferred alternative, we did get a question here wondering why our presentation refers to it as a preferred alternative. Preferred by who? Seeing that the entire Common Council it says here that they've rejected the 8 lanes and sent it back for reconsideration. So they're wondering what, sort of the label of the preferred alternative.
So, yeah, so, I mean, I guess it's the nomenclature we use because it really is the alternative that was part of the record of decision. We did get through the EIS process and a record of decision. Even though the record of decision was rescinded, it was identified as a preferred alternative through that process. So that's kind of, it's an easy reference point for us to kind of make sure we're clear on what we're talking about.
A question that we got in a number of our online comments as well as in the chat is about WIS 175 and if there'd be any possibility of turning WIS 175 north of 94 into a boulevard.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's a possibility, but it's really beyond the scope of what we're proposing. We do go up 175 to Wisconsin Avenue. That's really just to facilitate the ramp changes that we're doing as part of the stadium interchange. So any wholesale changes to 175 from, basically from the stadium up to Lisbon would really be a separate project with a separate goal and a separate purpose and need.
Thank you. For the Mitchell Boulevard ramps, there was a question as to how the westbound on-ramps at Mitchell Boulevard, will you enter on the right rather than the left as you do now? And will there be longer merge opportunities? So I don't know if you just want to address in general how the Mitchell Boulevard interchange is kind of.
Yeah, Jeff, maybe.
Yeah, so again, the Mitchell ramps, the ramps that exit to and from Mitchell today will not go to Mitchell anymore. They will be moved to the east. And so you will exit heading eastbound and you will exit down to 44th Street. And then the reverse from 44th Street, you can enter the freeway going west and right. You will exit to the right and you will enter on the right. Every ramp on the project is in that configuration, entering on the right, exiting on the right. The movements from the east to Mitchell that go to Mitchell today, those will be moved and you will exit, if you're coming westbound from downtown, you will exit the same ramp that you exit to go to 175, but then you will stay to the right and you will come down to a new local street that is going to be constructed underneath the stadium interchange just west of 175. We're calling it 46th Street. So that ramp from the east will exit and come down to 46th Street. And then there will be a ramp from 46th Street that would allow you to go east into downtown. Again, entering and exiting on the right.
Okay, a question that we've had in a couple different locations was about how did we determine the 25% decline in traffic to be able to keep it at 6 lanes? And sort of what type of analysis was done there? And that there was obviously considerable decline in traffic between 2019 and 2020 from the pandemic. And have we considered the sustained pandemic impacts? So I realize that's a lot of questions in one, but again, it was how did we determine the 25% decline to be that be the benchmark? And then, considering the drops that we've had, have we considered the sustained impacts of COVID?
Yeah. So I guess to answer the last question first, we're still evaluating. The trends are still, the full effects of the pandemic are still not fully understood. As I tried to show in the presentation, we've had some pretty wild fluctuations in volumes. There's definitely been a period where the numbers went way down. They rebounded, they gradually rebounded. They got especially in the PM peak, they got pretty close to where they were in 2019. And then now this winter, they've gone down a bit more. So the full effects are still being studied, and we're still working on that. In terms of determining the 25%, really what we did is we established our level of service, which is a pretty detailed engineering calculation. But what we wanted to do is typically you would look at an average level of service of a C. It's a letter grade, A, B, C, D, E, F. C is about average, and that would be your goal. For this urban area with a higher expectation on congestion, we actually dropped that down to a C, and we said we thought C was an acceptable level of service. D, I'm sorry, D. D as in dog. So we went from C down to D, recognizing the urban nature and the congested nature of the corridor. And so that level of service was what we were shooting for and our goal in the analysis. And the analysis itself was just a simple reduction by 5% increments off of that 2019 starting point, where we still knew we had congestion. It wasn't affected by the pandemic. And we said, what happens if you drop that by 5%, 10%, 15%? When we got to 25% is when we got to an acceptable level of service for a 6-lane facility. So that's how that came up. So it's what we call is a sensitivity analysis to understand the effects of traffic fluctuations, and it will help inform our eventual conclusion on traffic analysis.
Okay, thank you. We've had a number of questions about funding for rapid transit, and if there's possibility of doing more rapid transit, as well as if there would be any funds available for that.
So east-west rapid transit is a concept that Milwaukee County Transit System is moving forward on. The department, as part of the original EIS, committed to help implement that through some funding on the east-west project. We thought that the value that by providing east-west BRT, there's a traffic diversion. Some trips that will need to leave the system during construction can be hopefully accommodated by a bus rapid transit. So that commitment is still in force with the existing EIS. And what we've talked about in our Transit Technical Advisory Committee meeting is what other opportunities are available to us, what other types of things can the department look at, and how can we look at other ways to mitigate our impacts on the project and address the transit system funding issues that we can within our limited scope of the east-west. So we are looking at other ideas, but that commitment on the east-west BRT was in the EIS and is out there. And I would say as long as we can still use the existing EIS, it's a commitment that we're willing to honor.
Okay, thank you. Another question that we've received, again, we're monitoring all the various sources of the questions that we're getting from the emails and the online form and the chat. But we are receiving a few of them about noise and what will be done as far as noise barriers are concerned for the project.
Josh, you want to see if you can maybe talk a little bit about the noise barriers?
Yeah, you bet. So yeah, there was a noise analysis done as part of the original EIS. As part of the re-eval, we are going to revisit that noise analysis just to check, make sure everything looks okay. And then when that's determined, we'll know what areas that it's feasible and reasonable to add noise barriers. And then from that, there'll be a vote with those affected by the barriers to determine if they will indeed be installed or not. And if they do vote for those to be installed, those would be installed as part of the overall project.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here about the height of the stadium interchange. How high is the highest point of the interchange? And if you know how it compares to the bluff along Story Hill.
Yeah, Jeff.
Sure, I'll take that one. So due to moving their exit ramps to the right-hand side, we are adding a level to the interchange. and embedding the local street beneath it. So it's going from what we would call a 3-level interchange today to 4 levels. So by that change, the height of the interchange is increasing by approximately 25 feet. And just, I did a quick check as I saw that question come in. Compared to Story Hill, from what I can see on some plans, that's about an elevation of 665 to 670. And the top of the new interchange will be about 685. So it will be slightly higher than at least the southern edge of Story Hill. I can't see farther than that. So again, a 25-foot increase from today of the highest ramp today to the highest ramp in the future. And that would be at 685, and that's Story Hill is about 665 to 670 today.
Thank you. We've had a number of questions and comments too about public meetings and whether or not we're going to have any additional public meetings after this point.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Our intent is to do another formal public information meeting like this. We're hopeful that that can happen around the time that the reevaluation is complete, and hopeful that things have open enough where we could actually have an in-person component to that. So that's our goals right now. We'll see how that progresses. But we continue to also offer, opportunities for individuals or neighborhood groups. I know tomorrow we have got a meeting with Menominee Valley Partners. I know next week we're meeting with the Hilltop neighborhood. So absolutely, we're still meeting with people and describing and helping have people understand the project and getting valuable input.
Okay, thank you. We've had some questions about the increase in impervious surface that the project will cause in general, both if we just even through modernization or by adding capacity, and the impacts on water quality and quantity issues.
Yeah, Jeff.
Sure. So yes, if the current preferred alternative stays the preferred alternative, and we add a lane, we will have an increase in impervious pavement out there. In the next phases of the work, and as we head into the preliminary engineering phase, we have to assess that, quantify that as we get the design detailed, and then work with Wisconsin DNR and MMSD on a stormwater management plan that will have to document all that and address those changes, and how can we mitigate that increased impervious area and try and treat that water before it heads to the waterway. So the short answer is that's going to be dealt with in the subsequent design phases of the project.
Okay, thank you. People have asked in a number of the different comment forums about taking homes and businesses, and about the relocation process, as well as various impacts of that. Can you maybe expand on sort of what the relocation and compensation process is for homes and businesses?
Sure. I mean, it's all based around. I mean, there's lots of very specific federal and state guidance, and we follow that to the letter. It's all based around making sure that the homeowner receives fair compensation and making sure that the appraised value, I mean, fair market value is the term I'm trying to think of. So at a very high level, the process is the department will appraise the property that we need, present an offer based on that appraisal. If the property owner doesn't agree with that number, we'll pay them to have their own appraisal done, and presuming that those two numbers are different, then we'll negotiate based on those two different appraisals. And again, the goal is to meet and make sure that we're paying fair market value.
Okay, thank you. We've had a number of questions about induced demand and how WSDOT addresses induced demand in the project and in the modeling.
Okay, I mean, I guess the forecast, yeah, maybe Jeff, you have a little comment?
In general, with it being a mature and urban corridor, that level of induced demand is reduced from a more rural or suburban corridor because the development that is nearby is already all, there's all fully developed. So yes, with a capacity expansion, that can carry more traffic. So there will be an element of induced demand. However, again, with a mature urban corridor, it is much less than other expansion projects in more rural suburban. However, yeah, we work with WSDOT works closely with Sewer Pack and their model, and that factors into the traffic forecast that we use out to that 2050 date that Brian provided. We will continue to work, with Sewer Pack. Right now, the forecasts are being finalized as we move forward, and that demand also is bringing some of the traffic off of the local street network. And with the fourth lane, the roadway will operate more efficiently, and that will improve traffic flow and congestion and lower emissions in a non-congested environment.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to add to Jeff's answer, just to emphasize the fact that induced demand is different than pulling traffic off the local system, which we consider a good thing. If traffic can use the freeway rather than a local street, and it's the appropriate use of our facilities, that's not a bad thing.
Okay, thank you. We did get a question here about how someone can submit additional comments. So I just wanted to address that as we go along here, that we are, in addition to monitoring the chat, there is an online form on the Wisconsin DOT East-West Corridor website. If you go to the Wisconsin DOT and you type in I-94 East-West, you'll get to the project website pretty easily. As well as on the screen here, we've got Josh Levesque's email address. Josh is the project manager, and he's also getting emails throughout this as well. So, and again, we will try to answer as many of the questions we can tonight. We won't necessarily be able to get to everything that we're getting in all these different mediums, but that is how people can submit other questions. We have a design question here asking about the traffic that's in the pinch point just east of Hawley Road. And he's wondered if we had looked at the old rail and We Energies easement just north of 94, which I think, is that section kind of just north of along the cemeteries there, if we had looked at that. And so.
I think Jeff.
Yeah, I looked at it as a place to maybe for expansion.
Swing an extra lane there. I'm assuming that is what the question is.
Yeah. We looked at all options, I'll say that. I think just the proximity of that, while close, not close enough, and with the ramps from the 175 interchange, that the geometry of that just precludes, having a separate lane off in a separate corridor. Plus you have to bring it back. Not to mention that putting anything in that corridor brings extensive impact to ATC and their transmission facilities, which need to remain somewhere in the corridor to continue to provide power. So we're doing everything we can with our design to minimize the impacts to ATC and We Energies, and that option would have had a significant impact. So.
And I can add to that, Jeff. We did extensive coordination to minimize the impact to the cemetery, and having another freeway ramp through there, I think, would be viewed very negatively. So I think that would be another vote against.
Okay. We did get a question in a couple places if the DOT team has any analysis on the impact of the future East-West BRT, and it's how that will relate to the I-94 traffic counts.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. So, in general, the forecasting that the department does in concert with Sewer Pack's model, the Regional Planning Commission, assumes that there's a base level of transit and transit improvements. So, as Sewer Pack goes through their demand model, they're projecting out increased amount of of traffic over the years, and assuming that all the recommendations in their plan get implemented from a transit perspective, and then once they've reduced those trips because of the transit that they assume happens, then they assign that to the different highway facilities. So it does account for the traffic forecasting that we did, and soon those updates that we're soon to get does account for increased transit, and one of those is the I-94, or I'm sorry, the East-West BRT.
And I'll add, the East-West BRT study did conclude, their estimate was that by constructing the East-West BRT, they were estimating to decrease the number of cars on the road by 6,100 per day. So that was not specific of where they're specifically coming from, but surely, other local streets and other modes of transportation, but very likely some of that from the freeway as well.
Okay, thank you. We had a question regarding why we are rushing the project.
Well, we don't think we are. We're being very deliberate. We've been doing this since 2013. I guess we're going through the reevaluation process because we think it's an important project, because we think that there's a safety problem that's not being solved, and we know that with this size of project, every year of delay just due to inflation is costing us tens of millions of dollars. So I think we're being fairly deliberate in our evaluation of the work that was done, and we're hopeful that we can reach a reasonable conclusion at the end of the reevaluation process.
Okay, thank you. We have a question about that the project is from 70th to 16th Street, but where will the construction actually begin and end? The questioner noted that in other projects, actual construction went beyond the project limit.
Yeah, so that 70th to 16th Street is basically the actual full reconstruction limits. It's the limits from where the Zoo interchange reconstruction left off to where the Marquette interchange left off. As far as the actual construction limits, there's definitely overlap with traffic control and such things. So I think that is yet to be determined as we get into design. But there's going to be definitely an area both east and west that would still be officially closed or lanes tapered, as part of the overall construction project.
Okay. All right, and then, Brian, I know you've discussed it already, but there have been an awful lot of questions about the impact of COVID on traffic, and if you maybe just talk a little, just maybe to reiterate in case some people have just joined, it didn't maybe hear about how we are still doing traffic analysis with the project.
Right. So we obviously have been paying attention very closely to the effects of COVID. We've again, almost exactly a year ago today, when the Safer at Home order hit, we saw AM and PM peak hour volumes drop by 45%. The overall total volume in March of last year in those weeks dropped by 50%. And then since a little bit later, about May through September, there was a consistent return of traffic, pretty consistent growth back to pre-pandemic levels. Never quite got there, although in the afternoon peak hours we were very, very close. And since this winter, we've seen a bit of a drop. So there's, I think it's fair to say there's been lots of fluctuation over the last 12 months. The other thing, so we're continuing to do that, to study that. Exactly, what this means on trends is really the big important question, and we haven't reached any conclusion yet on exactly how the pandemic is going to permanently affect traffic volumes. Just to go over again, so what we've done so far is a sensitivity analysis on how much reduction we would need for the project to change from an 8-lane proposal to a 6-lane proposal. And basically what it is a sensitivity analysis looking at those pre-pandemic levels and saying how by 5% increments going down from 0 to 5 to 10, and we got to 25% before we reached an acceptable level of service. So we would need, our conclusion there is that we would need a 25% reduction in 2019 traffic to no longer justify the 8-lane. And right now, currently, we're not at that level of reduction. The important thing to point out is that we would need that reduction to be sustained over quite a long time. Our design life is out to 2050. As I said earlier, the traffic numbers are fluctuating. We're definitely higher than we were a year ago today. But our reevaluation continues, and we believe, at least at this point, with the current volumes, we believe the capacity expansion is still justified.
Okay, thank you. There have been a number of questions and comments about how the project may help people who don't have cars. There's other things that, you know, we've talked about shipping, other uses of the freeway, but
Yeah.
if you could address how the project may help people without cars.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the work that we're doing with the Transit Advisory Committee is getting at that question. We're hopeful that we can justify perhaps funding some transit as part of our proposal. So that's a little in flux now. Not a specific idea that I can point to exactly how we would do that. Our previous commitment on East-West BRT, I think, is part of that answer, but we're hopeful that we can do more. Also, from I think a pedestrian perspective, we're working very closely with the neighborhoods to see how we can improve some of the pedestrian and connectivity across the freeway, especially in the areas of 27th and St. Paul, 25th and St. Paul. Those areas where the freeway interchanges intersect with a local street, trying to make sure that those areas are designed in such a way that we are able to help people that want to be able to walk and use pedestrian facilities. I think one of the comments that sticks with me is that if you're up on 27th in Wisconsin and you want to get into the valley, that's a pretty scary walk. So trying to figure out a way to improve that for pedestrians is certainly part of the project's goals.
Thank you.
There's one thing to that, and we're also working with other leaders about bike facilities as well, and so we're working to make a connection and extension of the Hank Aaron Trail that right now ends just south of 94 right by the Miller parking lots, and looking to extend that underneath the freeway and to potentially connect up with the 30th Street corridor that's being discussed locally, as well as other bike improvements on some of the other arterials as well.
Okay, thank you. We had a question about 894, and if I-894 does factor in, could it be prioritized for some of the freight and through traffic instead of expanding the stretch of I-94?
It could. I think the question would be is how successful would a prioritization be, because people, there's I think a fairly equal amount of congestion on 894, and if vehicles are not using 894, it's because their destination is probably it's not part of their logical route for them. So certainly the through traffic, I think anybody, say for instance, is in Green Bay and headed to Chicago, they're much more likely to use 894. But if they're in Green Bay and they're headed to the Port of Milwaukee, or headed to downtown Milwaukee, or headed to Potawatomi, or headed to somewhere in the valley, obviously 94 is the appropriate route. So I'm not sure how much work, how successful we could be is to get people to not use 94. I think,
Brian, it
yeah.
goes back to the slide we had on in the peak hour, where 75% of the vehicles, which includes trucks, are entering or exiting this segment of freeway because they have a destination or an origin point that makes 94 the freeway they're going to use. So that statistic alone, drives that, and the commerce that comes off of 94, Miller Brewing, the Valley, all those trucks to those destinations are going to use 94.
Okay. Thank you. There's a number of questions and concern about safety in the stretch where there's narrow lanes and only 2-foot shoulders. Questions about safety driving through the narrow lanes, questions about if, in the spot where we have 2-foot shoulders, if someone can pull over safely. So just if you could maybe just talk about the safety concerns in that area.
Sure. I think, just the key points to hit on that again. So the length of this narrow section where we are actually at 11-foot lanes and the 2-foot shoulder is only 30 feet in length. The distance from the start and stop of the tapering to that is about 1,600 feet in length. If you drive this section of freeway, you know that on I-94 westbound, as you approach 25th Street, there's solid white lines for a significant stretch there. That entire section currently is 11-foot lanes and narrow shoulders, and that is through a curved section. So this will be much reduced from that condition. Yes, we fully realize the short distance of narrow lanes is not desirable, but it is needed to honor and not our commitment to not impact the cemeteries. And in addition, I'll highlight that the removal of the eastbound entrance and exit ramps from Hawley out of that area will reduce another conflict point, and so we have really a tangent section, meaning a straight section through there where we have this 11-foot lane, and again for this very short distance. So all those factors, we feel that the safety impact, if you will, is minimized.
Okay, thank you. There's a question about Washington Street and about how it may impact the busyness of the intersection for people trying to get in and out off of, I guess it would be 70th Street. So can you talk about any coordination we've done as far as with the city of West Allis, maybe on Washington Street? How that will all be planned.
Well, yeah, and maybe a little bit more detail in general about Washington Street. So it is, I think I said earlier, it goes from Hawley to 68th. It's actually Hawley to 70th. There's an existing section of Washington Street between that pre-exists, and I think the new connection that the project is proposing to construct will facilitate, and the whole goal is obviously to get have a clear and easy route for many of the businesses that are near Hawley that want to go east to get over to 70th so that they can connect to the freeway. It is a very congested area. It's a challenging area, and it's a very tight area right now. I know that the work that maybe folks can see on 70th Street itself, some of the widening that is proposed as part of this to facilitate that busier intersection is very, there's a very limited area where we can do that work. So I guess we acknowledge that it's a busy area. We think the improvements are supported and coordinated. We're coordinating very closely with West Allis and supported by West Allis. We think it'll be a help to partially mitigate, the changes that we're making up at the interchange.
Okay. Based on some of the comments we're getting, again, from the different sources, we've talked about how there's that during rush hour, 75% of the traffic starts or ends within the corridor, and I think that people are perhaps thinking that it all just travels within the corridor and not people coming to or from. So could you maybe explain that concept just a little bit better so people have a better understanding that it's actually people who are coming from another location, but maybe ending there or starting there.
Sure, yeah, so we're, again, this was a little bit older data from 2012, and it was based on some origin destination survey information. It really assumes that if you're using the interchanges along within the project limits, say 27th, 35th, Hawley, 68th and 70th, that you're accessing those from a fairly nearby distance, and so it really assumes those to be local trips. So those movements in those interchanges are considered local, and therefore part of the 76%. The other end of the trip could be outside the corridor, and the two examples that we gave, UWM certainly well outside the corridor, but they're using one end is at UWM, the other end of their trip is near the stadium, and so they're using presumably the stadium interchange or Hawley to get to their end destination. So I don't know, Beth, does that help explain it, or?
Maybe the other way is that the 25%, the counter, is somebody who does enter this corridor at 70th and travels all the way through. So does not exit or enter on any of the other ramps of any of the service or the 175 interchange. So again, 3/4 of those either enter 94 at one of our interchanges or exit. 1/4 drives all the way through in the peak hour.
Okay, thank you. We have a question about mentioning the potential for economic revitalization, and that can we give an example of a case where highway expansion led to economic revitalization for a minority community? And I think maybe even just point to some of the other examples of, and we've brought up, others have brought up in the Marquette interchange, how some of the improvements there for the valley, building Canal Street, or even possibly even taking down the Park East. Those are just some other things that have occurred with the freeway.
I think the Marquette is probably the best example of all the associated work that went along with that project. Certainly, the near north side at McKinley, and the interchanges changes that were made there, and the improvements around that interchange. As you mentioned, the Menominee Valley and all the improvements that have been made along there, and I think a lot of that was spurred on by the improvements of Canal Street and the creation of Canal Street to help mitigate the Marquette interchange project. Those come immediately to mind.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. There have been some questions about air quality. And I don't know if you want to maybe address some of the air quality concerns and things that had come up, and how it was addressed in the FEIS.
Yeah, I don't know, Jeff, if you're able to jump on that one.
Sure. So this is some of the information shared in the FEIS. So the total, we use a term vehicle miles traveled. You can just view it as volume of traffic and distance. The total volume of traffic estimated for the modernization alternative, so for expansion and adding the lane, is slightly greater than for the no-build alternative or keeping it at 6 lanes. The slight difference is created because of the additional capacity that is provided by the 8-lane alternative, so that will reduce congestion on the freeway, but it will also likely have an effect of reducing congestion on the local streets as well, as again, as Brian alluded to, traffic that right now in the peak hours may choose to use Wisconsin or Greenfield because the freeway is so congested, may choose to use the freeway. So that overall will improve the operation and traffic flow on the freeway and the local streets. And so that improvement in traffic flow, less congestion, less stop and go, that improvement in lower emissions as a result of that kind of offsets the fact of the slightly increased traffic. So The conclusion in our EIS is that it's kind of a neutral state, not worse, not better. It's hard to quantify over like an entire region a very specific air quality statistic, but on a more qualitative basis, that's the conclusion that was reached.
Okay. Now, this is one question that I'm not sure people would have off the top of their heads, but I'm going to ask just in case you do. If not, we can always get back to the person. There's a question about how we manage stormwater runoff. And do we know how much the funding is spent on stormwater versus noise barriers? Yeah, I didn't
I
know.
would say
Okay.
that's not a standard number. It's a project by project, situation. It really, yeah.
All right, but I just thought I would ask just in case I thought they would have the answer to that.
And we don't have, that would be an answer we won't even have until we're much further in the design process.
Maybe just to remind folks of Josh's answer is that there is a part of that process is that people get to vote on that. So even though we understand and know pretty well the potential locations of noise walls, and once we get through our, further into our design, even whether or not we build them is still up to the local people who get a chance to vote on them. So we'll know very late in the process actually how much the noise walls on this project cost because we're not sure we're going to build them all.
Okay, thank you. There's questions here about bike and pedestrian connections, and has any consideration been given to improving the pedestrian and bike connections between the near west side neighborhoods and the valley, and that how I-94 is a huge barrier for making some of those connections?
Yeah, we certainly have heard that comment, and as we get into the design, we'll look for opportunities to do that. Jeff mentioned earlier our commitment to connect the Hank Aaron State Trail to the Oak Leaf Trail under the stadium. That's certainly one way we're going to improve connectivity. We also know that we have an opportunity at 32nd Street to maybe make that bridge slightly wider so that we do provide those bike and pedestrian opportunities. So we know there's a couple easy ones, but we also know we need to do a better job and look at 25th Street, 26th Street, 27th Street in that area to see what else we can do.
Okay. All right, there was a question about who does the reevaluation and kind of how the process works. And it could be that some of the people were, again, some people may have missed some of the early parts of the conversation.
It's really the department. We hire consultants to help us with that process, but it's the department's project, our responsibility to document the impacts, to write the EIS, to get the approval from federal highways, and then it's our obligation also to reevaluate that after a certain amount of time has passed. So really the department's the lead on that.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to locate different questions here. Are we cutting into the bluff near Story Hill, and how much are we cutting into it?
Yeah. Short answer is no. There's one part of the design that wasn't highlighted to this point is on the north side of the freeway as part of the current preferred alternative. The plan is to construct a new frontage road that will carry local traffic from Mitchell Boulevard over to the local streets that I mentioned earlier, 46th and 44th. That location of that frontage road is set to be no further north than the current north edge of the freeway and the Mitchell exit ramp. So our plan is not to cut into the hillside at all. We will be, all the widening, all the extra ramp width and length for the new stadium interchange is being pushed to the south.
Okay, thank you. There have been questions about why the savings on a project can't automatically be spent on transit and local roads. Again, I know you've addressed some of this, but some people may be joining at different times.
It's really because of who gets to set the priorities, and so it's really the legislature's, it's at their discretion how much money gets put in the pots, and the transit pot is a different pot than from the highway pot than from the local road pot, and so they set the priorities by setting those budget amounts, and so as the department, we can't take money that the legislature said should be going for highways and say, well, we're going to put some of this over into transit and take care of some of the things that we think should be done in the transit. It's just whose job is it to set the priorities, and in this case, it's the legislature and the governor's job.
We've had a question about how accurate the sewer pack projections tend to be. And I think, yeah.
Really accurate. No, I think it's forecasting is a pretty exact science. I mean, it's a science, but it is subject to lots of a multitude of individual decisions and changes in land use and local compliance with the regional plan and things like that. I will say that the data that we were able to capture in 2019 pre-pandemic was tracking very, very closely to the forecasts that were in our original EIS. So I think we've had, we felt good about the small glimpse into the growth that, the very, very modest growth that was predicted by sewer pack in the original forecast. That seemed to be fairly accurate. And I think in general, the sewer pack models go through a very extensive certification process so that they do try to make sure that they're state of the art and being very accurate. So I think I'm very confident that they have a very realistic number, and they've proven that on past projects.
Thank you. There was a question as to whether or not any local streets will be widened.
Yeah, that I think that's probably a decision that's not totally answered yet. I know Josh or Jeff have maybe a better answer for that. I mean, I think we understand in general kind of the needs on the local street system, and I'm just thinking about different interchanges and how we may need to, maybe a good example would be at 35th Street, where we do have showing some widening up and down 35th Street to facilitate the new intersections with the freeway. So I guess we do know at that level what might be needed.
We're not adding through lanes to any of these local streets, so within the footprint of the work that would be redone with the freeway, we're going to have the same amount of through lanes. We may be having added length to turn lanes to improve the holding capacity of these turn lanes and the tapers in and out into them, but that's the extent of the added lanes, and it's only within the footprint of our immediately adjacent to the freeway. And we're working closely with City of Milwaukee on the layout of that, and we'll continue to do that as we progress into more detailed design.
Okay, there's a question as to who makes the decision regarding the plan and regarding approvals.
Well, it's the department's responsibility for, it's our jurisdiction to address any changes and proposals on the interstate system in Wisconsin. So it really starts with the department making the decision and getting concurrence by federal highways through that record of decision process that would allow us to use federal funding as part of this implementation.
Thank you. We've had a couple of questions about other technologies like integrated corridor management and some things like that, and how if those can be used so that we could go with 6-lane instead of 8-lane, and sort of what other technologies we looked at as part of this study to try to make a 6-lane modernization work.
Well, integrated corridor management is really more of a traffic signal design approach to connect, a series of signals along an arterial, and some types of that has been implemented on past mega projects. However, we coordinate with the city of Milwaukee. There's also a concern that from the city and the people that live on those adjacent arterials that we don't want to turn those into higher speed, and really increase the volume on those too. So it's a balance on integrated corridor management, and something we're coordinating with the city on that particular technology. Outside of that, again, with our limited footprint that we have and the limited space of this corridor, we looked early on at some other ideas of high occupancy vehicle lanes and other things, but it's just not going to solve our problem of congestion. We need the 4 lanes for all lanes of the traffic, given the volumes, again, 2019 volumes that we have on this roadway. So.
There's a question about, I think a follow-up question to some of the bike ped improvements after you'd had your answer, and that could those same improvements that you mentioned be made with a 6-lane modernization as well as an 8-lane alternative?
Yeah, I would say yes. I don't think there's any limitations. I can't think of anything offhand. I would say in general, very likely yes.
Okay. All right. There was a question regarding the design. Will the freeway be raised 30 feet, or will there be a gradual increase? I'm sorry, I don't know where the 30 foot came up. I'm
we're
sorry.
talking about maybe the 25 feet in the stadium. I mean, in general, our elevation of the freeway is going to be pretty, I would say, very close to where it is today. The one area where it does change is in the stadium, because of Jeff's answer previously about how we're going from a 3-level interchange to a 4-level interchange. And so that increase of will be, very gradual. I mean, it's gonna affect the ramps mostly coming into the interchange, because the ramps, let me call up a different, I mean, it's the highest level ramps are the what we call the flyover ramps, going from eastbound I-94 to northbound, and then the westbound, the complementary move at the westbound to southbound. So those are the highest ramps, and the gradual, the slope on those ramps will be fairly modest and gradual. So I don't know if, Jeff, there's any more you can add to that. Yeah.
No, I mean, everywhere else along the freeway, again, is staying at the very similar elevation to today. All the local streets that go over or under are in that same general configuration that they are today.
Thank you. We've had some repeats of some earlier questions, and the question about how does highway expansion lead to revitalization in minority communities? And I wonder if maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the work we've been doing with Near West Side Partners and Menominee Valley, and working to see if we can maybe get some economic revitalization in that 27th Street corridor and greater connectivity, because that might, it may sort of help address what we're looking at as which is probably the most important part of the question, I would think, is how we can maybe help make that change on this project.
Yeah, I think what we've heard from Menominee Valley Partners and Near West Side, which are 2 business organizations based in that both kind of intersect here at 27th and St. Paul. I think what they're viewing the project as is an opportunity to make the area more attractive, more connected, more integrated with the community, less opportunity for panhandling and other criminal activity. So I think all those are concepts that we're hopeful to be able to achieve with the project, and we think that working with them, we can achieve some of those goals. I think in more general terms too, I think the fact that we've talked about the DBE opportunities and how lots of DBE businesses are locally based. And for the zoo interchange, that was over $100 million of contracts that went to DBE firms. I think that's another way that we very directly kind of impact the minority community.
Okay. There's a question as to some of the traffic projections. And I know we've kind of come back to traffic a few times, but there are people saying that they believe that a lot of the traffic in the corridor has been flat for, some are saying 10 years, some are saying 20 years, and various comments that we're getting. And I don't know if you want to address sort of traffic in the corridor in general. I know there were certainly impacts during construction of the zoo interchange, had many years of impacts on the traffic in this corridor, as well as even some of the recession impacts in, 2007, 9, if maybe you just want to address some of other things that impact traffic.
We have seen growth. I mean, I know, as you implied, Beth, there was lots of factors on the Milwaukee County freeway system, and lots of things that affected volumes up and down because of the Marquette interchange, the Mitchell interchange, the zoo interchange, all those major construction projects, and how that shifted traffic one way or the other over the years. The thing that we were able to do in 2019, pre-pandemic, but without a significant freeway project, was count all the traffic on the freeway system. And I kind of implied earlier in one of my answers, we did see some growth in those numbers as over the last 10 years or so. So it's not, it's not astronomical growth, but it's fairly regular, modest growth. And that really matched fairly well the very modest growth that Sewer PAC predicted in the forecast. So I think we've got the data, again, to show that the trend has been generally increasing over the years. Certainly years where the recession of 2008, 2009, 2010 had some big impacts, but then also saw the subsequent rebound of the volumes when economic activity returned.
There are a number of questions about climate change and how that has been sort of taken into the various parts of climate change have been taken into consideration in the final EIS and in any of the project plans. So I guess I would think that, air, water, noise, and sort of, they all have different issues within the climate change umbrella.
Sure. I think from an air quality perspective, Jeff mentioned it earlier, there is a pretty good analysis, a very good analysis in the EIS that shows the effects and the a minor net benefit from the project from an air quality perspective. I think we also, I'm not recalling exactly what we said about climate change in the document, but I think we did address in some way in the previous EIS climate change. But I think air quality is really probably the thing that focuses, probably directly is the link to the climate change issue.
Okay. Thank you. Why can't WISDOT wait? I'm hoping I didn't ask you this question already. Why can't WISDOT wait until the pandemic impact is known, the impact on traffic?
Well, yeah, I think we did get this before, but I'm certainly glad to repeat it. I think the department feels it's the right time to move forward because we do have a safety problem out there, a pretty significant one. It's one that we discovered and knew about going into the study, but is not going away. So there's a safety issue with not moving forward. We also know that the delays over the years with this size project cost us a considerable amount in inflation. We had an $852 million project back in 2014, and we know it's over $1 billion now. So that's $150 million in just inflation costs over the years. So we know the pandemic has an effect. We think that we can answer the effects through this process. And we think waiting and delaying is not the right answer.
Okay. Thank you. Another question that we've had is what would the safety issues be with keeping 6 lanes when you've got 8 lanes coming from both the Zoo interchange and the Marquette interchange?
It comes to a term of lane drop where you have a number of lanes. Let's just use the Marquette as an example. So we have lanes coming from 794, you have lanes coming from the south of 94, and lanes coming from the north of 43. So right now, the reason the DOT added the 4th lane through pavement marking and narrowed lanes in that area was, again, over lane drops. They were seeing both congestion and crash problems of the number of those lanes coming from those various ramps narrowing down to the 3 lanes in a relatively short distance. And now with the completion of the Zoo interchange, we have the same situation on the west end of the project. So again, with the volumes of traffic on each of those movements out of the Zoo, both just eastbound coming through the Zoo, from the north through the Zoo, from the south, those all bring high volume roadways come in, and basically a lane of traffic or more in each of those. And so as you're experiencing now, as Brian mentioned in the beginning, since the Zoo has been completed, that reduction down to 3 lanes before about when you get to 70th and 68th Street is causing, merging crashes, as well as that congestion of all those lanes causes, a high probability of rear end crashes as well.
Okay, thank you. We have questions about acquisition, and do we anticipate the numbers of acres of acquisition, and have we already added, have we added in any of the properties that have maybe already been acquired?
Yeah, we got that comment recently, and we're working to add those numbers in. I think the question references the fact that there's a parcel just near 27th Street, just to the west of 27th Street, south of the freeway, that the department has owned for many years, knowing that some changes were likely to happen. And then also the emission testing site, again near 25th, that would be more like 25th and St. Paul in the southeast corner. That emissions site, obviously served a different purpose many years ago, and the department has decided not to sell that until we know exactly where this project is going. And right now, the proposal would be is that with the shifting of St. Paul, that a significant portion of that site would be used. So anyhow, I guess the question, I think, was about those 2 parcels, Beth, but was it also like just total relocations, or?
Yeah, just sort of relocations in general.
Yeah, I guess the total right now, our estimate is approximately 45 acres of new property would be needed for the project. This is in addition to the significant amount of right-of-way that we already own, obviously, as part of the existing freeway. But of that 45 acres, I think the project team has done a great job in really maximizing the utility corridor that's out there. So 35 of those 45 acres, or about 80%, is publicly owned land already, whether it be utility corridors or lands in around the stadium district with the Miller Park parking lot and things like that. So we've consciously moved the alignment to maximize that utility corridor, and we think do a fairly good job of minimizing the private land that will be needed for the proposed alternative.
Thank you. There's a question about whether or not temporary noise walls would be built during construction to mitigate some of the construction noise.
That, I don't think we've ever done that before. It's not to say that we couldn't, but There is in general, there's a pretty precise calculation that's done to justify the cost of noise wells. And so the benefit cost calculation for a permanent installation needs to be a positive calculation for us to determine that a noise well is justified. So I guess from a construction perspective, we could do that same calculation, but given the temporary nature of it and the expense, it would probably be hard under current guidance to justify doing something. But that's not to say we couldn't look at that.
Okay, thank you. We got a question about employment opportunities for the project, and would any of the trades have opportunities for internships and various sort of workforce development kind of things? We had a couple different questions that, so.
Yeah, the department is really, after maybe a little bit of lesser activity, really, I think, come back strong to emphasize these programs and look for opportunities. I think we didn't mention it this evening, but we also have a business advisory committee that we're hoping can give us some insights in how to prepare businesses and workforces for the opportunity that we think is coming during the construction phase. So absolutely, we want to tap into existing programs and emphasize and be ready, as I said, to be ready for the opportunity once the construction comes, so that there are internships and people available with the right skills that can take advantage.
Okay. There is a question about accident data. We've had questions in both the online chat as well as in some of the comments that came in online. And I don't know if we have data as far as in any of the stretches where we currently have more narrow lanes. I think just on the eastern end of the project area, kind of coming out of the Marquette, where there's lesser shoulders. I don't know if you happen to have any of that data.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely have that data. We, as part of the reeval, we are right now refreshing the crash data that was used and part of the original FEIS. So now we are looking at 5-year period is typically what WSDOT does. So we're looking at 2014 to 2018 data across the entire corridor, and it's verifying and validating the same results that we had previously with crash rates 2 and 3 times, as Brian stated, even some small segments that are upwards of 3 and 4 times the average crash rate on a similar facility. So I don't specifically have the data of that 11-foot lane area, but we could get that, provide that.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question for you. People have been asking about electric vehicles and their impact on noise, and the possibility that we may not need noise barriers in the future. And again, we've had both questions in the chat and others. I'm sort of putting some of these questions together, but would noise barriers be taken down in the future if
What?
I mean, that's
I guess what
for this question, but
Yeah. I don't want to shoot from the hip, but I think what my understanding is most noise, traffic noise is road noise. It's the tire on the pavement. So I don't think electric cars would have a significant impact on the amount of noise. I don't know if Josh or Jeff have any.
I mean, trucks are probably the last of all the vehicles to convert to be all electric, given, so it'll have an impact probably, but not, hard to know the total aggregate impact, of noise at this point.
okay. Thank you for that. Sorry to ask some questions that are off in the future a bit, but there was a comment about design and whether or not if we could eliminate access points, would that improve safety and therefore make the 6-lane modernization more possible? I don't, probably You just your professional engineering judgment on this one, is whether or not, if you took out, a few of the interchanges, what might that look like?
I would say yes. I mean, I think it's not ever going to happen. I mean, people are used to the existing traffic pattern. People use, hundreds of thousands of people use the freeway every day to get to their locations. And so I know the study many years ago, as a cost-saving measure and as a safety measure, proposed elimination of the 35th Street interchange, and there was a lot of negative feedback on that. So I would say, yeah, we could build an I-94 between 68th and 27th Street with no interchanges, and that would probably be safer, but it really wouldn't be serving the city or the community, and I don't think we would, public opinion would shoot us down pretty quickly.
All right, thank you. How will the traffic model be evaluated before accepting it?
Well, the model itself, the demand model that SewerPAC has, is evaluated and accepted by SewerPAC in an independent process, and I don't know where they are in that cycle right now. I'm assuming the model they have has been accepted and verified. The volumes that it generates does go through an independent review by WSDOT, and that's actually the process we're in right now, is comparing the WSDOT work to the SewerPAC work and resolving discrepancies, and there are a few minor ones. So I guess in a roundabout way, we are kind of independently verifying the model through our own independent process.
Okay, thank you. There's questions about event traffic and how we will be evaluating some of the stadium traffic, both in the past and one thing I know we've discussed at some previous stakeholder meetings too is that, between the 80 games a year, hopefully playoff games added to that, plus other special events which take place at the stadium, that at what point does it not so special if it's happening, 90, 100 days a year that we've got a lot of traffic there. I mean, this isn't Mayfair Mall on Black Friday. This is something that happens a lot of days of the year, and sort of how that is judged in relation to other traffic conditions.
So I think there's a couple different things going on. One is that we do not, I don't think the state can afford to design around those 80 events, even though it is a pretty regular occurrence. We've done some things, I think, in the stadium interchange, hopefully to help brewers and local traffic access the freeway, but our overall design goals, whether it be the level of service D that I talked about earlier, or using the 250 highest hour rather than a more typical 80 or 30, really reflects the fact that there is this pretty large dynamic of brewer stadium traffic that tends to add 10,000 cars at least 80 times a year. Hopefully, like you said, hopefully more. So I think we're in a small way we're trying to improve the stadium to make sure it works as best as it can, but we're not overall designing the freeway to address that large influx of cars.
And I'll add that it is the department's plan to at least analyze stadium traffic discharging and how that overlaps with some of the PM peak periods, both coming in for evening and night games and discharging for afternoon games. So we will be looking at that and working with the Brewers in the Stadium District on how we can, most efficiently and handle that traffic while maintaining, most importantly, the traffic on 94 east-west.
And sometimes I called up the stadium interchange here to show that there's so many intersections and so many design details that can be looked at from a perspective of how it affects the offloading and loading of the Miller Park, AmFam Field parking, and those are the types of things that I think we're open to. But the amount of lanes on the freeway is probably something that we know it's something that we're not able to accommodate.
Thank you. We had, in some of the other comments that we've been receiving, there have been some people representing different firms and different labor unions asking how they can better connect on construction projects in the future. DBE office and some others might be.
Yeah, and maybe that's some materials that we could provide. I mean, yeah, we do have a DBE office that can help explain that process. There's also, like the Road Builders Association that's, available to help maybe firms understand, kind of the overall. Also, we can probably share some information about the letting process and how to get connected and become a qualified contractor.
Thank you. I know we're getting a little bit close on our time here, so we do want to remind everyone that we will still have the comment form available on the website. That's not going anywhere, so we'd love to still get comments from people. Josh Levesque, whose email address is here on the website, will obviously be certainly accepting comments throughout the course of the project as we do on every project. And we do really appreciate the comments. Sometimes I think people ask if we, how we feel about project, getting so many negative comments, but it's, we really do appreciate the time that people spend, and we don't obviously just talk to people who like us. So it is actually very helpful, and we really very sincerely appreciate getting the comments on the project. And I'm sorry that we haven't been able to get to all of them, but go ahead, Brian.
And I'll just add too, Beth, I mean, it's an important part of the reevaluation process that we're right in the middle of. So, having these forums, getting feedback, it helps, it definitely helps us understand how the proposal affects the general public, and those are the types of things that we have to reflect in our documentation.
Right. And we also, in some of the other comments and correspondence we've been getting here, that we have been getting questions about the forecast, and I wanted to make sure that people do know that they will continue to be evaluated as sort of the long-term impacts of travel patterns are known. And that was actually a comment I received from one of the traffic people on our project too, because he wanted to make sure that people know that we are still evaluating and working to better understand some of the impacts of the pandemic as it's evolving with us.
Yeah. Again, maybe I know this is redundant, but we have seen some pretty wild fluctuations in volumes. As I mentioned earlier, the dramatic decrease a year ago, but then the gradual increase, and then some up and down this winter. So none of that really indicates a trend yet, but as was said, we're hopeful to be able to better understand that and verify, where volumes are going.
Okay, thank you. And Brian, I don't know if you or Jeff, it is, we are closing in on the time of the end of our meeting here, and as I know you had mentioned that we are going to be having another public meeting, ideally either in late May or early June, and ideally with an in-person component. So I guess we would ask if people could kind of keep in touch on that. There is also a place on the website to give your email address, so that we would like to have, if people would like to give future notices about public meetings, we'll be sending out emails to that. So I don't know if you want to wrap up with anything, Brian. We've just got a minute or two left before the meeting shuts down.
Yeah, I would, again, appreciate everyone's willingness and patience through this process. It's been a challenging one with doing this virtually, but thank you for that. As Beth said, I tried to call up our website. That will be continue to be updated as our information changes. Also, again, just remind everybody that there are future opportunities. Our next public meeting hopefully is coming in late May, early June, and that meeting will really be to share the results of the reevaluation that we're in the middle of right now. All right.
That's it, and we will try to get to other, we'll share other information on the website, and hopefully that'll answer some of the additional questions.
So,
Okay, that's it.
thanks.
Yes.